Well, good morning, everybody. It's a bright, beautiful morning, and I'm delighted to be with you. I've got my ginger tea and some slides, and maybe a different topic than you've heard during this incredible conference. And at the start of this, I just want to recognize Steve and the entire team for taking on this really amazing marathon of information and spending the rest of the year to curate the right speakers and the right information to bring it to your home so that you can have the tools that you need to transform your life. And just a little bit of background about me before we jump in on this topic, because I think it will help add some context. I started my own journey more than 20 years ago when I recognized that my patients were telling me that they were falling apart. And I thought this was the inevitable consequence of aging. I'd learned in medicine about all of the degenerative diseases and how to manage those through medications, how those medications worked on the individual receptors to lower blood pressure or improve blood sugars. But one day there was a woman sitting in my exam room, and she said, "Dr. Stoll, can you help me? I'm falling apart." I'd heard it many times. She had a long list of complaints and past medical problems. So I just asked a simple question. I said, "What does falling apart mean to you?" There was a long pause. And she said, "Well, falling apart means that my marriage is falling apart because my husband is exhausted from providing care." Well, I looked up from my chart, and she had my attention now. I had not heard that before. She said, "I can't travel to see my grandchildren. I can't attend church because my back hurts. I can't participate in friends' activities, and we're facing financial bankruptcy because of the cost of my healthcare." They had fallen into the donut hole of Medicare. And then with tears running down her cheeks, she said, "Dr. Stoll, can you help me?" In that moment, I was thinking back through all of my lectures in medical school, everything I'd learned in residency, and realized several things. I didn't know actually how to help her put her life back together again. I realized in that moment that all of these chief complaints, past medical history items on her list really were undermining the most valuable thing in her life, which was her quality of life. Those things that make life wonderful and add meaning were being impacted by this list of medical problems. I realized in that moment, I didn't know where these problems came from. I didn't know the root cause of disease. And if you don't know the root cause, you can't reverse it. I knew how to manage disease. I was very good at doing procedures and interpreting MRIs, writing prescriptions, developing a differential diagnosis, but I didn't know actually how to help somebody put their life back together again. So I left that room and I started a personal learning journey, which led me to the power of whole food plant-based nutrition, the incredible potential of a plate to transform lives and, in fact, our entire world, and lifestyle. And from that point on, I have been involved in lifestyle medicine. I incorporated it, I combined it with my traditional allopathic practice, and I saw miracles. I started using my prescription pad to write breakfast, lunch, and dinner. My favorite smoothie recipe from the day before, I would hand that out instead of prescription for medications, and I saw my patients' lives transform before my eyes in ways that I never imagined possible. They would come back and say, "Dr. Stoll, I have not felt this good since I was 18 years old. Dr. Stoll, my endocrinologist took me off my diabetes medication. I was discharging patients from my clinic because they were well." It affected my staff. As they began to see these transformative stories, they started asking questions. And I just heard from a staff member recently, this is more than 15 years ago, that she actually made a transformative change in her diet, and her Crohn's disease went into remission. She was, a young woman at the time, 23 years old, and her life was radically impacted by Crohn's disease. And now 15 years later, she still is symptom-free. And so, as you can imagine, as you all are learning in this event, and I know you're on day 6 with many days to go, the power of the plate is incredibly transformative. But also in this process of working with patients individually, of hosting 1-week total health immersions, we've done for Whole Foods Market now for 16 years, where we bring in 60 to 100 people 3 times a year and walk them through a week of education. But really, it's more an experience of the power of food and lifestyle. I have learned that so much of the journey for all of us starts up here with what we think, believe, and really we all need a seed of hope. And so today I want to just walk through an understanding of the science and the healing power of hope. You know, there's two types of hope. There's wishful hope, but then there's true hope, which is founded on evidence that if you pursue a certain path, there is an expected outcome. And hopefully by now, as you are 6 days into this process and seeing these incredible speakers, you're beginning to recognize that this is evidence-based medicine, that lifestyle medicine and whole food plant-based nutrition is founded on thousands of scientific articles that validate the power of adding more plants, stacking those plants onto your plate every single day, and how those plants find their way down to the deepest parts of your cellular activity, down to your DNA, and begin turning on and turning off the switches that lead to disease remission, optimal function of the body, and building resilience in your body that leads to flourishing. So as we begin, let's just define hope so that we understand what we're talking about. It's not the wishful thinking hope, or I hope things get better. True hope is a positive motivational state that is based on interactively derived sense of successful agency. So this is the scientific definition, so goal-directed pathways. But what it is, it's the increase in one's belief that a future positive state can be achieved. And so there's several elements that lead to true hope, right? If we're looking at belief that a future positive state can be achieved. One is that a pathway is laid out that has been tried and tested by other people, and they've achieved something that you or someone else would like to achieve. That's the power of personal story and transformation. Two is other people have taken that and it's reproducible. Three is there's good scientific evidence to validate that these stories we're hearing are true. And the fourth I would add is that there's good scientific evidence that not only the outcome is beneficial or hope-filled, but it also is kind of a holistic success as well. There are different, as you've learned, and probably you're hearing during this conversation, and then over these 17 days, there are different pathways to achieving things like weight loss. But not all of those pathways lead to the best possible outcome. For example, somebody can put themselves on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, lose weight, actually reduce inflammation, and see improvements in blood sugars and even cholesterol for a short period of time. But is that really the best pathway? For many reasons, it is not. And maybe even during the Q&A, we can go into this in more depth. But just very briefly, looking at that pathway holistically, we can begin to see, number one, it's not compassionate. It's not good for the animals. Number two, it's not good for the environment. Number three, all the scientific evidence points toward long-term injury, damage, and increased cancer risk with that type of a diet. And number five, looking at long-term studies on people on those diets, we can see that it leads to significant risk, kidneys and other organ systems. And so for many reasons, that is not a hopeful pathway. It gives a description of what might be possible. It helps, it gives some people an opportunity to see that this might be a pathway to losing weight, but it is not a holistic outcome. And so true hope is the holistic opportunity that a future positive state can be achieved, not only for myself, but it's beneficial for the collective. So I want to just start with stories, just to give some hope to all of us about the power of plant-based nutrition. And you're getting so much of the science in this 17 days that I'm going to just limit mine to more of the science of hope and lifestyle, and let some of the others contribute to the powerful science that you're going to be hearing. We could actually lecture for weeks on the science of plant-based nutrition, but I want to share with you a story today of my friend Marcy Madrid. This is Marcy and her husband Carlos, and I met them in 2014. And I met them through a good friend of mine, Dr. Autry, who's a heart surgeon at Midland Health in Midland, Texas. And I was invited to go to Midland for a CME event at the hospital, which was Grand Rounds, and also to speak at a local church. While I was there, I met Marcy, and Marcy had described to me that she had recently been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And this was dramatically impacting the quality of her life, as you can imagine. Multiple sclerosis is, again, an autoimmune disease triggered likely by leaky gut, where we get some of those proteins that slip through the normally tight junctions in the gut and find their way into the bloodstream, activating the immune system to start attacking tissues that look like those proteins, which end up being tissues in our body. So multiple sclerosis is one of those autoimmune diseases where the immune system begins attacking the central nervous system, the tissues of the brain and the spinal cord. And people that are suffering from multiple sclerosis develop inflammation in the brain and spinal cord area, and it results in tingling, numbness, weakness, sometimes pain, significant fatigue that can be progressive over time with loss of function and even loss of mobility. So Marcy was diagnosed. She was a young mother working as vice president at the hospital and had gone through the traditional pathways of allopathic medicine, which is a reaction to the overreaction of the immune system. So allopathic medicine takes very potent anti-inflammatory medications, some of which have been used as chemotherapy in the past, and works to dampen the immune response. And at one level, that's correct, because we don't want the immune system to create long-term damage in the brain and the spinal cord. And so it is an appropriate intervention to save tissue. But again, what's missing? We haven't gone back to ask the important question, what's the root cause? Why is the immune system attacking the brain and spinal cord? What was the inciting incident? And how can we turn back the clock? What can we do to actually begin treating the root cause and bringing the immune system back into balance so that it doesn't attack the brain and the spinal cord? So she had gone through multiple trials of these medications and had side effects to all of them. And that left Marcy hopeless. I've tried traditional medicine. The neurologists don't know what to do. They're referring me to other neurologists in Dallas because they're not sure how to help me. I'm barely making it through my day. My husband is carrying the load at home. I can't be the mother, the wife, the professional that I want to be because this disease is undermining my quality of life. And this is where hopelessness begins to set in. And it can create even more disruption in somebody's life. In fact, hopelessness, as we'll see, actually increases inflammation in the body. The body interprets hopelessness as a stress, ramping up the stress system with cortisol, increasing inflammation in the body, and contributing to further disrupt the microbiome and cause more leaky gut. So hopelessness, which is a stress, can make a condition worse. So I presented at the hospital and had conversations with Marcy, and Marcy grabbed on to the future belief that something was possible if she changed her diet and lifestyle. She had hope for the first time. And so Marcy began to transform her diet primarily and reduce her stress. She wasn't able to exercise, but through diet and stress reduction, she actively and aggressively worked to transform her life. And just one important point here, when we're talking about disease reversal, it takes a very intentional intervention to turn back the clock of disease. And one of the reasons that a lot of physicians today don't believe that diseases can go into remission is because they've not seen these intensive interventions of diet and lifestyle. People may make some changes, add a few more plants, cut out some sugar, but that's not enough to turn back the tide of disease burden that the body is bearing. I often think about this like a credit card debt, that, if we're swiping, it's one bag of chips, one McDonald's, one Oreo cookie at a time, and we build up this huge disease debt over the decades. Simply making small changes, adding a couple servings of fruits or vegetables, doing a little bit of exercise, cutting out some sugar is not enough. If we want to pay back the credit card debt, we really have to make big payments aggressively to pay it back. And the same is true of disease remission and reversal. We have to make big payments. That's why this intensive therapeutic lifestyle intervention is so important. And sometimes it takes 6 to 12 months, even 18 months of an intensive effort to help the body overcome the damage and begin repairing and regenerating the tissues that have been harmed. Sometimes it happens more quickly if there's not been a lot of injury. So Marcy began to create this lifestyle of health and take control of her life. As you can see, here's on the left is her MRI from November of 2014, and we're looking at her spinal cord. The circle that you see there is highlighting the spinal cord inside of the spinal canal in her neck. And as we look at that picture, we can see that there's a lot of white inside of the spinal cord. Normally, the spinal cord should be dark, but here it's patchy and white, and that's indicating inflammation. Their immune system is attacking the tissues of the spinal cord, injuring them, causing inflammation. And that inflammation is resulting in the tingling, numbness, and weakness in her arms and legs. Now we look at June of 2015, so 7 months later, after she had an intensive therapeutic lifestyle intervention, and the MRI of the cervical spine looks beautiful. You can see that it's kind of the gray dark is all one color. We don't see the patchy white any longer. All the inflammation has resolved, as did her symptoms. And from that point forward to today, she has remained symptom-free. Remarkable. And it was such a remarkable story that the specialist in Dallas that she had seen said to Marcy, I have never seen this before. I didn't know it was possible for somebody to go into remission with an intensive lifestyle intervention. And then here's a picture of her brain MRI. Again, on the left from November 2014, we see the large white spot there in the middle of the circle. And that is an inflammatory lesion inside the brain. Again, June of 2015, we see that inflammatory lesion has resolved. It's gone. All the inflammation in her brain completely gone. And Marcy today is vibrantly alive, symptom-free, and doing well. And this is what's so important. I love to look at MRIs and lab work and see that things have changed physiologically and anatomically. But this is what's most important, that Marcy is vibrantly alive as a mother, as a wife, as a leader in her community, in her profession, sharing her gifts and making changes all over the area. And so this is why I'm so passionate actually about lifestyle medicine. I love the science. I love to write. I love to study it. I love to see the results. But what gives me the most joy is seeing somebody be able to step in and live their best life, have a more wonderful life. But the power of this lifestyle and the hope that it brings doesn't just stop with changed MRIs, improved blood work, feeling better, or even improved, or even the ability to live your best life in those incredible roles as a family member. But hope was multiplied in Marcy. She took a hold of that hope and her transformed life, and she began to share that hope inside of the hospital system and Midland as a city. She started a not-for-profit called Healthy City in Midland, Texas. And as a kind of coordinated group of people that came together, originally that started out as a potluck, they began to imagine a healthier community. They started community gardens and gardening projects in schools. Here's a picture. Other people were inspired. Dr. Padmaja Patel in the middle there also came to my CME event and the church event. And we began working together, and she saw hope for her own life, her passions as a physician. And we worked together, and she opened a lifestyle medicine center at Midland, Texas. And she's gone on actually to be the president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. We worked together. We started a Food is Medicine conference that has run continuously through 2022 and will be revived again. But from 2015 on, conferences that reach 650 people every year inside of Midland, Texas, and inspired hope in those people that came. And so what's exciting about this is that, when somebody grabs a hold of this and sees a different future and actually achieves that different future, the hope that led them down that path can be shared with other people to help them find a similar path to health and healing. Now, what's amazing, I love the science of hope, right, and science of lifestyle. As I was doing some research, they actually have identified the region of the brain where hope lives, which is pretty exciting. And it is in the orbital frontal cortex. So right above your eye, right here in your brain, is where they can identify hope on functional MRI scans. And hope is involved in reward-related processing. So that means when we're doing something that gives us a reward, that part of the brain is turned on. Now, when we have hope, like Marcy, when she saw a potential future for her life that seemed desirable and that there was no other pathway to get there, and she realized it was the pathway of whole food, plant-based nutrition and lifestyle, it turned on that part of her brain. And when that part of your brain is activated, it initiates motivation, which is really critical. It helps with problem solving. So as we're working on making a lifestyle change, we're holding on to a future hope. We can begin to see how to overcome challenges, going over obstacles, around challenges, solving problems. And it helps us to achieve those goals in a very meaningful way. So it's very exciting. Hope is necessary. And one of the ways to achieve hope is to take that experience of initially seeing a different future and imagining yourself in high definition in that future. It's called the future healthy self. And to see yourself vibrantly alive, living without disease, achieving the things that you want to achieve, sharing the gift that's been given to you and watching others' lives be transformed, because that meets the need in all of us of meaning and contribution. And so it's not just a wishful thinking. I wish I could be better. I wish I didn't have heart disease or diabetes. It's actually recognizing the science says that there's a pathway forward. I see amazing stories like Marcy's that tells me it's possible. And I'm going to begin imagining myself as that healthy, vibrant person. Now we're activating hope inside of our brain. Your brain is beginning to strategize, to see the pathway, to find and navigate the channels, the strategies, the tactics that it's going to take to get there. And you naturally begin to be pulled into that future that you imagined. And the obstacles that may have seemed insurmountable or too big, you find a way around them, up and over them, and you achieve that goal. So just a little bit more about the science of hope, just to let you know that what I'm talking about today is a critical component of a lifestyle change. So they found that when healthcare providers establish hope as a target outcome by telling stories inside of their office, it creates opportunities for both patients and clinicians to find meaning in their journeys. And I learned this early on in my practice. as I was beginning to work with patients and I was enthusiastic about the science, which you're all learning, epigenetics, angiogenesis, the microbiome, all of the exciting, science of lifestyle and transformation that happens at our cellular level when we're eating plants. What's more important than delivering the science right away is to establish hope. And one of the most meaningful ways to establish hope is starting with a story. Starting with a story that is similar to the person, the patient that I was sitting with. And that establishes hope and creates an opportunity for people to begin seeing a different future. And it also creates meaning for the clinician and the patient. They also determined there's a biological signature of hope, that you can look at somebody's lab work and see a signature of hope in their lab work. And it's basically lower inflammation, that's IL-6. It's lower cortisol levels, and cortisol, remember, is that stress hormone that is released in our body when we encounter stress. And the body is agnostic to stress, the source of it. It responds to all stress the same way by releasing cortisol. It can be relational stress, financial stress, not sleeping enough, even exercising too much is a stress in the body, eating unhealthy food. All these things are stressors, environmental toxins. Not only do they damage the cells, but they cause an increase of cortisol, which has a wide range of negative impacts throughout the body. Elevated endorphins, those are the molecules that come from our adrenal glands that make us feel good. After we exercise, we have endorphin release, and that is the kind of feel good and reduces anxiety and depression. Dopamine is released in the brain, and that's a natural part of our reward system. When we are engaged in like healthy relationships, pursuing goals, exciting activities, our body releases dopamine, and it gives us a positive reward for the activity. Hope does that. It releases dopamine in the brain and improved immune function. So when we have hope, our immune system naturally upregulates. Our immune system gets bolstered and functions more efficiently because we have hope. Now, high hope individuals showed diminished stress reactivity and more effective emotional recovery. So when people were walking with high hope because they saw a future vision of themselves and held on to it, they again had a much more resilient life of responding to stress, and they had more emotional resiliency as well, that internal strength to overcome some of those things and not be cast on the sea of the waves of emotion. And to contrast that, looking at some of the studies of hopelessness, when people can't see a way out of where they are, they feel trapped. And this is often the case for so many people with diseases today. They accept that this is what they have for the rest of their lives. The side effects, the loss of function, the challenges that they see on a daily basis. And that creates a sense of hopelessness. Things aren't going to get better. They often hear from healthcare providers, unfortunately, that things will only get worse. And so you develop naturally hopelessness in that situation. People that were hopeless during acute hospitalizations had a much stronger predictor of death than if somebody had hope. And why is that happening? We can just look above, right? It's when you have hopelessness, increased inflammation, increased cortisol, decreased dopamine and endorphins, and decreased immune function. All of the things that would be important in a healing journey if you're fighting an acute illness. Now, unfortunately, in many areas of life, we have naturally gravitated toward using fear as a motivator. It's easy to grab onto. It's easy to trigger a response in somebody with fear. And we have been falsely led to believe that if we try to motivate people with fear, we're going to actually motivate them to long-term change. But that's not true. If we all think back on when fear has been used as a motivator, it's a very short-term motivation. It actually activates us to a place of contraction rather than expansion. It narrows our action plans. It actually contracts our ability to think and plan and move forward. And so fear is a very unhealthy way to motivate people. In medicine, we often use this today. If you don't make changes, you're going to have a heart attack. If you don't take better control of your blood sugar, you're going to lose a leg. If you don't stop what you're doing, you're going to die. And anytime we try to use a negative as a motivator, it is not going to lead to long-term change. Sometimes you encounter people where they will tell a story that motivated them. But what really happened? They heard the fear, but then they began to see a different future, and they saw themselves healthy without that problem, and they created some hope for themselves rather than the fear being the primary motivator. Research has also shown that when people have positive messaging, they're more successful. 2 studies of hope and self-efficacy, the belief that a person can help themselves predicted their intention to take action against skin cancer. And again, that's the power of what you're learning in this conference. You can be empowered to take control of your life and your future by changing what you put on your plate, on your fingers, on your fork every single day. How you use your feet to move, how you use your words to speak life, how you use your breath to calm your nervous system, how you connect in meaningful community. All of those incredible positive choices that we can make every single day are also establishing hope because we're helping ourselves and we're helping others. And 3 ways to undo fear. So if fear has been planted in your life, things that you can do to overcome that is begin a personal action plan. And I'm sure during this event, you're getting lots of action plans, but just develop a simple, achievable action plan that you can begin working on a daily basis. Doing good for others, contribution is very important. And it activates even more hope, social community connection, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so finding ways to be of use and benefit to others is very important. And we saw that in Marcy's life. And there are lots of ways to do this, even at a very simple, at the most basic level, which is just volunteering somewhere or coming alongside of someone that is working on a lifestyle change. If you've been successful, taking them on a grocery store tour, inviting somebody over for a meal. It can be very simple things that we start with that can lead to these social action plans of good deeds. And then being aware of fear and reframing that in a positive light. If you have had those things spoken over you or you've heard those things, simply to just flip it and reframe it in a positive light. And again, imagining that future healthy self, excuse me, imagining that future healthy self and the positive outcomes of a lifestyle change. How is my life going to be more abundant, more wonderful, more enjoyable, more impactful because I'm making these lifestyle changes? So also we see with high hope individuals, and again, this is just to give greater validation that things are actually happening inside of us at a cellular level when we are walking with hope. So again, increased activity in the front part of the brain, and that brain is responsible for planning, decision-making, goal setting, overcoming challenges, seeing the future. Lower amygdala activity, that's the emotional kind of memory center of our brain. And so that dials down and we become less reactive to negative stimuli and more focused on positive outcomes when we're walking with hope. Agency thinking is now with hope, someone believes they have the ability to actually initiate and sustain actions toward achieving their goals. Isn't that exciting? that naturally when hope takes root, when that seed of hope is planted and it germinates and begins to grow in our brain begins to initiate naturally actions toward achieving that goal. It just happens inside of our brain. Pathway thinking is laid out. We begin to generate multiple strategies to achieve those goals. And particularly in the face of obstacles, we can see the pathways out and around to get to the goal. We become more resilient, overcoming challenges, naturally develop more optimism because we're seeing a bright future. And when we have hope, it's a protection against agency. So Nelson Mandela said this, may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears. Isn't that powerful? And so that's what I like to encourage people that I work with, that when you're making a choice to, add more greens, add more berries, chop in some mushrooms, add more herbs, pile up your plate with sprouts, do all these incredible things, your choices are reflecting a hope-filled future. And to focus on that future healthy self, and even imagining what your future healthy self would say to you because you're making those choices can really help to establish that what you're doing is the right choice. So we also know that fear activates the sympathetic nervous system. And what is the sympathetic nervous system? This is the fight or flight nervous system. This is a part of our nervous system that is activated if we were to be walking in the woods and come face to face with a grizzly bear. Fight or flight immediately takes root because you are trying to survive. And so it naturally increases blood flow to the legs. It prepares your immune system to fight infections or injury. So it ramps up the immune response, and it increases your heart rate, increases cortisol because you are ready to fight or flee. And if it's in the kind of natural realm where we're not fighting grizzly bears, but we're fighting, responses in and around us, sometimes we freeze. So this is meant to be a turned on response and a response that is turned off. We fight or flee the grizzly bear, and then we go back and we sit around the campfire and tell the story, and the sympathetic nervous system activity dials down, and all of those chemicals that were released into our body decrease as well. Things like cortisol and adrenaline. And so the sympathetic nervous system response to fight or flight is really designed for survival. But long-term, what does it do? Long-term, it basically eats our body from the inside out. It causes weight gain. It takes calcium out of the bones, leading to osteopenia and porosis, damages the organ systems, it dulls our thinking, contributes to depression and anxiety, increases blood pressure, leading to increased risk of heart disease, decreases our immune function over time, leading to chronic inflammation and increased risk of cancer. And when the brain is under fear, it has reduced flexibility. So we have a lower ability to make decisions and overcome challenges. Our brain's function, that prefrontal cortex that was activated by hope, remember, that saw a different future and knew how to get there, under fear, that function decreases and we can't see how to get out of the problem. So you can begin to see that people with high hope can see a future and know how to get there. People living under fear are trapped in a box and they can't figure out how to get out. Hopefully you're beginning to see why hope is so important. Under fear, the amygdala takes over. Remember how that was activated, or it was dialed down, in hope, but now under threat detection, or this threat physiology with fear, it's ramped up. So we're under this constant state of high emotional fear. When we're living in fear, we take, when we're living with fear, we choose, we revert back to old habits. Why? Because that's efficient and easy, and we can't see any other way to start choosing something differently. Our creativity is impaired, problem solving is impaired, and fear both. So as you can see, when we are living with fear, it's unsustainable. It's not a way that leads to long-term change. It leads normally actually to burnout. And then when we haven't accomplished what we set out to do because we set out with the wrong captain, which was fear, it's easy to slip back into judging ourselves and feeling guilty and ashamed because we didn't do it. And it leads to this all or nothing thinking. I did it, I didn't do it. So you can begin to see how important hope is, that we have to have hope that brings a sense of safety, curiosity, and compassion into our lives, where we understand with hope that I'm making changes and I'm getting there. It's not all or nothing thinking. That, we congratulate ourselves for making progress along the pathway because we can see the goal that is ahead of us and we're achieving that goal. And we're moving out of that contracted, tight, dark place of fear. Now, we kind of one of the far ends of false hope is the over-optimism. And I just want to kind of counterbalance some of this as well. That it's, what we're talking about is the hope that comes from good science and a good understanding of where we're going and why we're doing it. Now, over-optimism actually bypasses reality. So when I'm encouraging a patient of mine to make a lifestyle change, I wouldn't simply say to them, everything is going to get better in 2 days with a lifestyle change. It's super easy. You don't have to do anything. Just eat one smoothie a day and everything gets better. See, I've given them misguided hope because I have minimized the effort and time and support needed. I haven't helped them understand the true pathway to get to that future healthy self that they're envisioning. It ignores some of the emotional and environmental barriers. Making a lifestyle change is really significant, and it's important for us to understand and be aware of everything around us and how it impacts our choices and decisions, from the culture that we live in, to the traditions that we grew up with, to the relationships that we're in currently, to access to food, the costs, the skills, all of these things that are around us, kind of the determinants of food in our life and lifestyle, are a part of a lifestyle change. And being aware of those things and moving them from a reactive place to an awareness and action helps us to take an authentic and honest assessment of those areas of our life and not ignore some of the emotional environmental barriers. And that leads us from a place of unrealistic goals to realistic goals, and avoids disappointment along the way. When we're under false hope, we actually have a dopamine spike. It's a hyper reward system that like everything is going to be wonderful. But then when we realize it's not, because it's overpromise, we have a crash because we haven't experienced real progress. Dopamine drops, we lose our motivation. And so we fall into this boom bust cycle of effort and exhaustion. Now, does this sound familiar? Yeah, that's right. It's the diet industry. That is exactly what false hope is. Every single January, there's a new twist on diets. If you eat cabbage soup for 2 weeks, everything gets better. That's all you have to do. You'll lose 20 pounds. They share stories of people that lost weight. If you eat these special cookies, if you do this, one thing, this one superfood, this, eat green coffee, fat falls off your body. It's false hope. Big promises, big dopamine spike. Most people try it. They don't have real progress. The dopamine drops. They have motivation loss. Then they begin to think something's wrong with them. they've gone from the boom to bust cycle. Shame, guilt, self-judgment all slip in because what's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with you at all. It's the diet industry that is wrong. They have it wrong because they're using false hope to promote a future that's not achievable and definitely not sustainable. False hope leads to nervous system confusion. These boom-bust cycles create stress in the body, and it keeps the body in this low-level fight or flight because there's unmet expectations. And when there's unmet expectations, we naturally slip into that state of blaming ourselves, and that's thinking something's wrong. And that creates the internal stress inside of us. And so I just want to take a minute and pause, have a sip of my ginger tea. But I want to say to you, if you have struggled in this diet industry and have felt what I am describing, boom bust cycles, false hope, and then the kind of the natural things that follow that, which are the self-judgment, condemnation, the guilt or shame, I just want to tell you it's not your fault. I know I want to remove that burden from you. It was an industry that was built with the intentions of actually helping people lose weight, but built on the wrong foundation. Built on the foundation of false hope, unrealistic expectations, oversimplification of a process, and an unsustainable plan. And so I just want to tell you that you have more than enough. You are more than enough. And that this lifestyle, hopefully plant-based, which I tell you is not easy in the beginning. It takes time and effort. It takes support, takes new tools, takes some learning of new skills, but that it can transform your life like nothing else. And so there is true hope at the end of this rainbow. But I just want to remove that burden from you. I want you to take off the backpack if you've been carrying it because the diet industry gave you a false sense of hope. And I want you to be able to disengage from those negative emotions and leave them behind. And so finally, we see that this false hope is unsustainable positivity. They call it in the research toxic positivity, which invalidates the real struggles of life. It's the Pollyanna, everything is great. There are no challenges and problems. All you have to do is buy, 5 cookies and eat 1 a day to lose weight. It's not true. So getting rid of that unsustainable positivity, there is helpful positivity, but this is the misguided hope, unhelpful positivity. And when we're in that state where we're, trying to be overly positive, where we're in the boom cycle, it prevents us from having self-compassion, realistic pacing, and seeking good support and being a part of a community. A part of this journey is also connecting to yourself and being compassionate to yourself and saying, you know what, gosh, it has been really hard, and that's okay. The culture that we live in makes it more difficult than ever before because the culture is built on unhealthy foods, on hyper convenience, on hyper palatable foods that take advantage of our reward centers. The industry understands the power of the reward center in our brain and wants to capture that reward center and use it to separate you from your money. And so it is not easy. And I want you to just be able to take time and be compassionate toward yourself and say, it's not easy. It has been hard, but I have compassion for myself. And I know that I can do it. I know that I am enough. And I know that I can be supported by a helpful community, that working together, we can overcome this and we can all succeed together. And so this leads to hope with grounded planning, hope with meaningful community and connection, hope with a plan that leads to a natural, sustainable lifestyle that produces health inside of the body. So just in summary, we can see that, when we have unhealthy hope, versus healthy hope. It leads to wishful thinking versus grounded optimism. And I'm hopeful that through the 17 days, you will have grounded optimism because you will be exposed to the amazing science of lifestyle. The focus in unhealthy hope is the outcome only. And healthy hope, the focus is on the future self with process and making progress. And understanding that as we are making changes, it is not a straight line. Everything that we do in life, as we're making changes, we do some things well, and sometimes we try something that doesn't work out as well. We learn and we try it again. And so there's a natural undulating pathway to success. And that is the process and progress. And we just celebrate the progress. We learn from things that didn't work out well, and we make changes. The pace for unhealthy hope, which is the diet industry, right? As I'm talking about unhealthy hope, the best example is the diet industry. It's all or nothing. You go all in on the diet for 3 months, making all kinds of sacrifices, and you finish the 3 months, and what do? You celebrate with all the foods that you had given up, all the things that you were sacrificing. And so it's all or nothing. A healthy lifestyle is process, small steps over time. And it can be a healthy lifestyle can be an intensive lifestyle intervention as well. But it's progression. It's stepping over time, making those steps over time. In unhealthy hope, emotions avoid discomfort. Healthy hope makes space for all feelings. And that's part of this journey, is engaging and understanding ourselves and moving things from the subconscious to the conscious level, and being aware of things that may trigger us, things that may cause us to, desire to have other foods, and having compassion for yourself, saying, I see what that is. I understand the feeling. What is the real need that I'm experiencing around that feeling? I have a need for security or a need for meaningful connection. So how can I better meet that need than, eating the ice cream? So you're making space for all the feelings and finding positive pathways to meet the feelings and the unmet needs. Unhealthy hope is I'll do it alone. Healthy hope is I need support and structure. Power of community is critical. And unhealthy hope, the resilience, there's a motivation crash when obstacles arise. But when we have healthy hope, we encounter obstacles and we make adjustments. Why? Because remember that orbital frontal cortex is turned on. And so we can make adjustments around new obstacles or challenges. And we keep going with self-kindness because we see a better future. So that's some of the science. And now let's kind of move into some of the application of this. How do we create hope for lasting change? We certainly don't want to move back into fear or misguided hope. We want to walk in hope. So how do we do that? Well, we start with reality. We acknowledge what's hard. And we acknowledge it without shame. It's simply a recognition. We're looking at ourselves through an objective lens. And we're just saying, you know what, gosh, it's really hard for me to make some of these lifestyle changes because, I have X, Y, Z in my life. And it's not shameful. It's just an appreciation of some of the challenges. And you can ask, what are the real challenges right now? This grounds us in reality, but we don't want to live just in getting caught up in the challenge. We want to look at the challenge and then imagine the healthy future that we're seeing. And we may need to connect with community, with other people, and say, these are challenges that I'm facing. I'm not quite sure how to solve them. Can you help me? That's the power of community, connecting with people that are on the journey with you, some that are further ahead, some that are maybe behind you, but all together and collectively, we solve each other's problems and support each other in the process. So that's why hope is grounded in reality. Number two, we define tiny wins. Set those minimum viable goals. Oftentimes, if I'm working with somebody and I'm encouraging them to start moving more, I'll ask them, what is the lowest number of minutes per day that if I told you to start doing some activity, that many minutes a day, you would say, gosh, that's too easy. And sometimes they'll say, 2 minutes, Dr. Stoll. I'll say, perfect, that's what I want you to do. My prescription for you is 2 minutes a day of movement. Now, that doesn't, come close to what the general recommendations are, which are 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But in their brain, when they say, Dr. Stoll recommended 2 minutes of movement a day, their brain says, wow, that's really easy. I can do that. And so what happens? They naturally do 2 minutes. And when we do 2 minutes a day and we start to feel a little better, what happens in our brain? You say, I probably could do 5 minutes a day. And they naturally go to the 5 minutes. And so it leads to a sense of consistency. It leads to natural successes, which leads to positivity and greater hope that I can achieve my outcome. So it's not an intensity that is pushed in. Sometimes we have to do that if it's life or death. That is understandable. Sometimes if somebody has heart disease and they need to reverse it, we do need an intensive lifestyle intervention. If we have a little more time, we can work with these smaller steps and these smaller goals. But this works for anything that you want to do in your life. Set a minimum viable goal. Number 3, include support. Who can encourage or join me in this? Gather some people around you that want to go with you. And they can be virtual, they can be in your business, they can be friends, they can be in your community, but gather some people around you. And think about some structures that can help when motivation dips. Maybe some music. There may be a movie that motivates you. There may be a presentation that you watched during this conference that inspired you. So put some of those things down, write them down so you can remember, I need to go back to this so that I can be motivated again. We all need that. Number 4, practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself like you talk to a friend. Sometimes we have this negative Nelly or Ned in our head that really just says so many bad things to us. And I always say that that's not really you. That's a voice that has been programmed from outside of you by the world because you really do care about yourself. And so talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend. And when you hear that negative voice, just say, I'm not going to listen to that voice because that's not me. This is what I would actually like to say to myself. The research shows that to have a healthy relationship with someone, we need to speak 5 positive words for every 1 negative word. And that includes ourselves. Having a healthy relationship with ourselves requires 5 positive words for every 1 negative word. Now, this is challenging because that negative voice has been in our head a long time. But if you can begin thinking about speaking to yourself like you'd speak to a friend with that level of encouragement, it will make a difference. Next, expect setbacks. It's always a part of every successful journey. There are setbacks. When we encounter a setback, we simply go back to the baseline. I had a difficult week. There was a lot of stress. I kind of lost track of what I was eating. The first thing you say to yourself, it's okay. It's normal. And all I need to do is go back to the baseline. That's it. We don't have to slip back into the old guilt-based, shame-based, judgmental thinking that has been programmed. You just simply say, you know what, that's okay. I remember Dr. Stoll said that setbacks are a part of the process. It was a busy week. I give myself compassion. I'm just going to go back to the baseline, what I know I need to do. And you go back there and you move forward. Number 5, revisit and adjust. Check in weekly. What's working? What needs tweaking? And make some of those adjustments. Again, just recognizing I'm on the journey, and so I'm just doing things a little bit better every time. Hope grows when you adapt, not just persisting. Persistence is important, but we also have to learn to adjust and adapt along the way. And that's why this conference is so beneficial every year, because we can learn how to overcome challenges, we learn new information, and it gives us the opportunity to adapt. So maybe screenshot this, but this is for an exercise for you later, just to do some self-reflection. And this is my homework for you after this, after you leave here. So envision your future healthy self and ask, what does my future healthy self want me to say? And want to say to me. And so just take some time. You may sit quietly in the morning or evening and just get a picture of what that your future healthy self looks like in high definition. How do you look? How do you feel? What are you able to do? How do you look 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now? What is your quality of life like? How are your relationships impacted? What are opportunities that are open and available to you because of your healthy self? And just imagine that and appreciate it, and then hold on to that vision. You might ask yourself, what's a lifestyle change that I've been hoping for? What are things that I would like to add into my life? Maybe something you learned in this conference. What's the story I've been telling myself about how it should go? And just listen again without self-judgment. This is just observation. Maybe you realize, like, oh, I've been hearing the story that this is too hard, that I don't have enough strength, or I can't solve problems. I'm not able to do X, Y, Z. And that's the story that has been running in your subconscious or in the back of your brain. Maybe it's the alternative, but just be aware, appreciate it, and recognize it. It's moving it out of the place where it has power into a place where you have awareness and you can make a change. You can ask yourself, what feels hard or scary about this challenge? Just appreciating that there are things that can be difficult. Those are things that you can take to other people in community and find solutions. What are some of the biggest challenges, and how can I overcome them? How have other people overcome those challenges? What's one tiny step that I can take that feels both doable and kind to myself? What support, human or structural, can help me succeed and be sustainable? Again, finding that meaningful connection and community. How will I talk to myself when things don't go as planned? And what would grounded hope sound like in my own words? Begin writing some of those things down, or imagine that. And this serves as a seed bed, planting seeds that will lead to hope and successful adoption of lifestyle challenges. So I couldn't not put in a little bit of science for you. So why do we have hope with a lifestyle change? We have hope because all of the science continues to push toward this place where we recognize, like this large meta-analysis study, that eating more plants every day has maximal protection of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and premature death. And you'll see all of these studies are kind of coming to the same conclusion: 10 servings of vegetables and fruits. Here we see a potential reduction of 7.8 million deaths globally every year. That's incredible. In this study, looking at plant foods, antioxidant biomarkers, and the risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer, again, we see that the benefits are 800 grams or 10 servings of fruits or vegetables a day. So the good news is every serving adds benefit. It's a dose response. Here we see the same thing, a dose response. Every time we add more dark-colored fruits, vegetables, beans, lentils, chickpeas, spices, beautiful herbs, anytime we add more of those things, every single serving, a dose response, showed a significant inverse association. More plant protein, lower all-cause mortality. An additional 3% of energy from plants was associated with a 5% lower risk of death from all causes. Every time we're adding more plants over animals and processed food, our bodies are becoming vibrantly alive. And just to kind of round out a little bit of this with hope and lifestyle, I couldn't pass up movement and fitness, that when we're moving more, whatever that looks like, we don't have to be big and buff like this cat. It is dancing, it is Pilates, it is yoga, it is playing soccer with your children. Whatever you like to do, when you are moving, your body produces these molecules called myokines. They've been labeled the hope molecules. They're released from your muscles and they go into your bloodstream, and they do a lot of things throughout the entire body. In the brain, they've been shown to boost mood, reduce the neuroinflammation in the brain. Much of that is driven by food and processed food. prevent the cognitive decline because it's increasing blood flow. And it improves mental resilience, again, reducing anxiety and depression. And the good news is that moderate activity is enough. So community and cortisol connection lowers stress. Strong social ties lower stress biomarkers. Social support reduces cortisol, CRP, and IL-6. Remember, that was also the inflammatory load that we saw with hopelessness. We see that loneliness increases disease risk. When we are feeling lonely, it, again, like hopelessness, ramps up all those inflammatory markers. We see that emotional connection buffers the nervous system. Close relationships activate oxytocin, which is the connection molecule that builds relationships, and it calms the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary axis, the hormonal axis in our brain. And out of Harvard, warm relationships are the #1 predictor of health and longevity. So again, hope is built in community. And when we're in community, again, it lowers stress biomarkers, improves our emotional connections, and also enhances our health and longevity. Just a quick story about Kelly. This is a woman that attended one of our health emergencies. She's there in the pink feather cap. And most people would say she looks happy and she's doing well. She shared with me when she came to our health emergency, she was tired, depressed, had high blood pressure, thyroid disease, overweight, exhausted daily, infertility, and elevated cholesterol. Her husband had severe ulcerative colitis and had a pending surgery. But she caught a vision of this and made a lifestyle change. And we see the impact of this. She had a brand new life. This is just a few years later, and we can see the infertility has resolved because there's a new baby boy. She looks totally different because everything changed in her life. Her husband canceled his surgery because his chronic inflammatory bowel disease was resolved. They started running together. Because she felt so well, everything changed. She got promotions at work, and you can see that it truly is new life. And that's a hopeful story for all of us. So how can we begin cultivating hope? They found that healthcare providers communicating optimism, realistic hope to patients improved treatment adherence, resilience, and overall health outcomes. When hope was included as a part of the prescription, everything improved. Adherence to the recommendations, greater resilience, overall health outcomes. And so hopefully you're getting some hope today. When hope is included as a part of a process, it builds self-agency that we can see incremental successes. There's goal setting and pathway thinking. We develop personal action plans. Mindfulness, gratitude, and visualizations are important. Again, that future healthy self, learning to be grateful and compassionate to yourself in the process. Connecting with a supportive community is essential, and reframing those narratives. Again, working on that conversation in your head and speaking to yourself like a kind friend. And tying back into the positive stories of others is essential. Stories are really a powerful way to motivate hope. And we see that stories connect us in a meaningful way, that stories of hope, like I've been telling today, activate 6 regions of the brain involved in reward centers and the memory centers of your brain. It releases the reward molecule dopamine. Again, it also releases oxytocin, and it connects us with that individual and the people that were listening to the story in a very meaningful way. And it connects this part of our brain that is responsible for problem solving and decision making. So maybe you just listen to the story of Kelly, or you heard Marcy's story, and it connects you in a meaningful way, and begin to think about how that I can have the same future, and understanding what they did helps you to make better decisions. And it creates this neural coupling. These wired connections help the reader or listener personalize the story with their own ideas. So you might listen to Marcy's story and say, I can do this. We begin personalizing it and making it our own. And we can revive their story in our lives after hearing it and receive motivation and direction from those stories. When we're telling stories or listening, there's something called mirroring, where we listen to the story and it automatically synchronizes the brains with each other. The same parts of the brain become activated as two people are listening to the story, and they're connected with the storyteller in the same way. There's emotional resonance. The stories that we hear stick in the listener's memory, and there's an emotional connection that's associated with that, which creates deeper engagement. When we're listening to stories, it activates this theory of mind network that allows us to understand and empathize with the thoughts, feelings of others, which is essential for all of us. It's crucial in healthcare settings where empathy and shared understanding are essential for effective care. And anytime they've included storytelling inside of healthcare prescriptions, it's led to much better outcomes. So stories are seeds that shift outcomes. So we have better outcomes when stories are shared as a part of a prescription. And anytime they just gave information versus a story, the story always led to greater retention of information, greater application of that information, and better long-term change. Storytelling evokes emotional engagement, allows us to connect with ourselves and others in meaningful ways, so more empathy. And it personalizes the care. When people hear stories of others who have been through a similar experience, they feel less isolated, more compassionate towards themselves, and more hopeful. And it also binds us in relationships in a meaningful way. So I want to just share one more story with you. This is the story of a gentleman that came to one of my immersions, and he described that his life was broken, much like this bull. No man in his family lived beyond 50. He was in a very difficult place and struggling, and ended up on the streets, homeless and using drugs. Through some level of support, he found his way off the streets. He was able to get free of drugs, but still had no hope. He came to one of our immersions and he learned about the science of plant-based nutrition to overcome disease and heart disease, and then saw a different future for himself. And he said to me, for the first time in my life, Dr. Stoll, I can see beyond 50. I can see that if I use a whole food plant-based diet, eat a healthy lifestyle, and live a healthy lifestyle, I don't have to die like everybody else in my family. So he had hope for the first time. And then he described to me, he said, what's happened to me through this information about lifestyle? He said, I've been kintsugi'd. I said, what is kintsugi? Kintsugi is the ancient Japanese art of taking a broken bowl and repairing it with valuable metals. And we see here that broken bowl has been repaired with gold. And he said, you know, I was broken, but I'm actually more valuable than I was when I was broken because I've been kintsugi'd. And these kintsugi bowls become more unique, more rare, more valuable after they've been repaired. And so it's just a beautiful message for all of us that life is challenging. We've had hard times, but when we see hope, we begin to take a pathway forward to overcome that, we all can become kintsugi, more valuable, more rare, more beautiful in our repaired state than we were before. So kind of bringing this to a close, we have, the power of the plate is this hope-filled power, and it is connected to everything in our life. And the power of the plate has the power to transform our entire world in incredible, meaningful ways. Chief Seattle said this, all things are connected like the blood that unites us. We do not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And so when we begin to infuse hope into our lives and potential and a whole food plant-based lifestyle, it has a ripple effect throughout the web of everything that is connected to all of us every day. One of those places where hope can be infused and healing can begin to start is around a table of shared food and relationships. and relationships really are healing opportunities hiding in plain sight. We can infuse hope in one another. We can share ideas. We come together in meaningful community, support and encourage each other. And all of this leads to a more wonderful life when we're connected together, living in hope with passion and purpose, and living around a whole food plant-based plate. So I want to thank you, and we'll shift into some Q&A now. Thank you for your attention, and I'll turn this back over for questions.
So, hi, Dr. Stoller. So that was a very beautiful presentation. I really appreciate it, and it is different than the other presentations that that we've seen thus far. So really appreciate that perspective. How would people get in touch with you, Dr. Stoller, if they wanted to follow your work or reach out to you?
So a couple of ways that you can find me. One is through the Plantrition Project, which is our not-for-profit that is present to help educate healthcare professionals. We have downloadable resources for patients. That's plantritionproject.org. You can also find information, drscottstoll.com. And then our health immersions are totalhealth.com. And I'll be releasing, I have a really wonderful virtual health immersion that I'll be releasing next month. So if you want information, you can find it there.
Great. Thank you very much. So you spoke about how there's a physiological signature for hope. How do we know that that's hope and not something else going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in those studies, they controlled for other possible confounders. So these were people that were not, making a dietary change. It was simply the use of a story to infuse hope without any other impact of a lifestyle change at that point in time.
Great. And based on what you're talking about and the physiological pathways that you discussed, it sounded like hope is the opposite of stress. And many of these talks that we have during the conference talk about lowering stress. Is hope the best way to lower our stress?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to lower stress. Again, part of it is going back and just first not blaming or shaming yourself for being stressed. That's all. Sometimes we're like, oh, I'm stressed. Why am I stressed? What's wrong with me? So first, we just have compassion for ourselves. Number two, I always like to look at root causes. And it's just simply with awareness, identifying what the root cause of the stress is, because we need to solve the root cause. Then there are stress management techniques. Some of those are deep breathing, like box breathing, where it's breathing for 4, deep breath in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then rest for 4 before taking the next breath. It's just a simple 4 box of deep breathing. That helps to downregulate cortisol and brings peace and stability back into your life, which allows for more clear thinking. That can be done in the shower, sitting in your car. Exercise lowers stress. Hope certainly lowers stress because we see a different future. And we can, like we talked about today, it helps to find a pathway forward that is encouraging and positive. Being connected in community lowers stress. And getting a good night's sleep also lowers stress too.
Great. And how do we recognize before we get into it and learn that, that it's false hope, how do we recognize false hope promises before we dive into them?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Anything that seems too good to be true, too easy, or promises too much should send off a little bit of an alarm signal for us to say, okay, wait a minute, let me take another look at this. And examine the message that's being said. So, if it looks like, and if, you look at, perhaps just to use a diet as an example, if you look at a diet that is promising a lot, and you can see over time that it has not delivered what's been promised, that would be another opportunity for us to say, this is misguided hope. This is not true hope. If there's a realistic message associated with a hope-filled vision, with a real and grounded plan to get there, then we would identify that as true hope.
So I'm going to ask you to put your medical hat on. So something like Ozempic and the GLP-1 inhibitors, Does that look, does that seem like false hope, or does that seem to have meaningful promise, not to the people who are so sick because they're obese and almost anything is better than where they are health wise, but to the general public, because so many people with 20, 30 pounds of, extra weight are taking it on a regular basis?
Yeah, this is a complex and good question. Um, so the GLP-1s work on a system that is naturally activated in our body by lifestyle and plants. So it's not like there's an absence of GLP-1 activation without the medication. Plants and a plant-based diet and a lifestyle activate GLP-1 in a meaningful way. So the same results from GLP-1 medications can be achieved through a plant-based diet through the activation of the same GLP-1 system. Now, for some people, GLP-1s may be a better initial step than gastric bypass, in their circumstances, and for some people that aren't ready to make a lifestyle change. And it can help them get started. But the false hope of GLP-1s is that's all you have to do, and that there are no side effects or consequences from the GLP-1. We know that anytime we hyperstimulate anything in the body from an external source, there's a long-term consequence. And the same is true of GLP-1s. There are consequences to using GLP-1s. People lose weight, but you also lose muscle mass. And that muscle mass is not replaced with muscle after the weight loss. And if you gain weight, you actually replace muscle with fat. So you actually do damage long-term to your metabolic rate, if you have not implemented a lifestyle change in addition to the GLP-1. And I think that's the misguided hope, is that all you need to do is do an injection to lose weight, when in reality, it's a lifestyle. If the injection is necessary to start the process because of other circumstances, then that's fine. But it needs to be paired with and used for only a short time, paired with a lifestyle of plant-based nutrition and movement and stress reduction that leads to a healthy long-term life.
So why do people seem to be so prone to falling for false hopes like Ozempic as opposed to real hope like a whole food plant-based diet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, part of it is the way that our culture has been built. Our culture is built on short-term convenient solutions that are easy. The pharmaceutical industry has programmed us to look for those simple solutions. Take a pill, take a shot, everything works out. Second is the culture is not created to assist us in making a lifestyle change. We're going upstream against a very strong cultural current to make a lifestyle change. And so it's not easy in the beginning. And there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace around diets, nutrition, and a lot of voices that add to this kind of noise and signal that can make it difficult to make a change. And so there's a lot of pressure and confusion that kind of confound the true pathway forward, which is lifestyle. And then finally, physicians only get about 1% of their total nutrition education in medical school, around, or total time in education around nutrition in medical school. So we are not trained as healthcare providers to understand nutrition and make good recommendations. So from the medical visit to the culture to the people around us, we're programmed to look for easy solutions. And things like GLP-1 seem like the easy, right solution because we see all these positive stories, people are losing weight, but we don't hear the backside and we don't hear the truth about the benefits of a true lifestyle change and how it brings vibrancy into your life.
So that kind of lends us up to the next question, which is even when the thing that you're hoping for, like the outcome of being a whole food plant-based. I mean, there's so many stories of people, I'm sure there's tons of them just with the people in this conference of people reversing tons of diseases, having resilient health. Um, when you have such a pot of gold at the end, what is it that people don't go for? Even if they believe in it, they tend to not think it's, they not think it's attainable. How do we give them hope that they can actually get there? Because, there is hard work involved.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this part of the message that, we need to promote in this space is that, there is a hopeful message. And we have all these incredible stories of people that have transformed their lives. Forks Over Knives does a great job of documenting stories of transformed lives. And then we just need to give people a hopeful, supportive pathway forward and connect them into meaningful community. After doing this for more than 20 years, I've really become convinced that we need community more than anything. Community, a healthy community helps solve problems, reinfuse hope, encourages people, supports them, lifts them up when they're down, gives us an opportunity for meaningful contribution. Community is really essential. And so I really want to encourage people to find and be a part of a community, because I think that's what's necessary for a greater kind of adoption of a lifestyle inside of the United States and kind of globally.
So that's actually one of my next questions, which is on community. Um, so when I think of a functioning community, like my ideal community, I think of a group of people that have common interests, or at least common goals, common experiences that or shared experiences. Um, do you when we say community, do we need something like that, like a support group, or is it, if you have, two good friends, or or three good friends, and they have a deep relationship, but they're all individual friends, so you're never hanging out. They're not, they're living their lives, going to their job, have their family. They can have wildly, drastically different lifestyles than you do. Is that the same as a community?
Yeah, that's a good question. What is meaningful community? At its lowest level, one person that is positive, encouraging, going the same direction that you're going can be the beginning of community. Obviously, the more supportive people around you, the better. We know from the research that virtual communities also do help in meaningful ways. There was a study looking at marathon runners, and they found that people that were involved in a community online in marathon running were more consistent in their workouts, ran longer during their workouts, had faster times, felt better, had fewer injuries, versus those people, marathon runners that were not part of a virtual community. So I think at any level, especially because it's challenging today, whether you're connecting into a regular virtual community or people that are around you, any type of positive connection is beneficial. Now, we know from studies as well that when we're involved in a small group of people that are living in the same type of lifestyle, like the blue zones, like a study that was done in Honduras, where they looked at the microbiomes of people inside of community. They found that those that were in the most central part of the community on a daily basis were healthier and had more similar healthy microbiomes than those that were on the periphery. And so ultimately, as we move into closer connection on a regular basis with healthy people, it affects our entire being, from what we think and believe all the way down to our microbiome.
So that's interesting on the microbiome, and not to go too far off on this tangent, but with the microbiome and the idea that, when we touch other people, when we're, like they say that if you live with somebody, your microbiomes will become similar, that you can actually test the microbiomes of the individuals, but like from the doorknob type of thing, and that people who are central to the community, who have more relationships, are actually having more microbiome exchanges. It's a little gross to think about, I guess, but they have more microbiome exchanges, an opportunity to have a more diverse and robust microbiome from a science perspective. I'm just, kind of talking out loud there. What are your thoughts on something like that being a mechanism for it, as opposed to just good feelings of being the center of it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's exactly what happens. We seed our environment with our microbiome, and the other people naturally do the same. And so our microbiomes become synchronized. All the studies, from our finances to our belief systems to our habits to even the amount of food that we eat because we're mirroring people next to us, are impacted by the people directly around us. And so we really do become like the people that we are connected to.
Great. And so now, how does our or the the American or the standard American diet and the common lifestyle that we lead, primarily sedentary, undermine our hope system physiologically and our ability to actually be hopeful and at least easily hopeful?
Yeah, that's, having been in healthcare for so long and having patients come to me, you hear the messaging that comes out of healthcare today. And patients will tell me, my doctor said that this is the worst case he's ever seen and it will never get better. My doctor said that, it's only going to get worse from here and I can expect to have, pain and disability. My doctor said that I'll end up in a wheelchair in 2 years. These are the messages that people are given. Why does that happen in healthcare? Because it's part of the culture. It's what you hear when you're in training. And as healthcare, we don't have any interventions. We don't have any experience of seeing people live a different life. That's been the experience for most healthcare providers. They see something and they remember, oh, this is what typically happens, and that's what they give to the individual. And so people leave the doctor's office without any hope because the doctors don't have any hope because they've never seen anything different. They've never seen the evidence of being, another possible outcome. And it's a recognition of that's the way the system is. And part of it is that as healthcare providers, we've never been trained to understand that there is another possibility. It's an educational deficit.
So, well, the question that I was trying to get at is, does our diet and lifestyle actually undermine our capacity from a physiological perspective for hope? You could tell, like with depression, for example, people who eat, terrible diets and don't exercise, don't sleep well, have a higher degree of depression. I would assume that means that they're further away from being able to feel hope as easily, at least.
Yeah, certainly, we know that when somebody has a lot of inflammation, you can have neuroinflammation in the brain. And when your brain is inflamed, it causes greater levels of anxiety, depression, difficulty thinking, and difficulty seeing a pathway forward. So certainly, when we're eating unhealthy, when we're not sleeping well, it is harder to have hope. And it's harder to hang on to the idea that there can be a different future. And when you are eating unhealthily and you're not sleeping, your energy levels are really depleted. And so when you just do kind of an internal scan of reserve capacity to make a change, your body says, there's nothing left. I don't have the time, the ability to think about anything else or to make a change. And so we can end up in a very stuck place. And that's why, that hopeful vision with some reality and then connected to support and resources is the only pathway that leads to a true healthful outcome.
Is hope contagious? And if so, should we seek out hopeful people in our lives?
That is a great question. And yes, hope is contagious. We all know this when other people around us are hopeful. And, we talked about the mirroring in that lecture that, when we are listening to stories of other people that have been successful, we mirror those neurons. Our neurons get kind of coupled together and we think the same thoughts, we see the same pathway, we have the same emotional response. And so essentially that, it's like it is contagious. We take that into ourselves and we develop hope because somebody else had hope.
So you brought up the term mirroring and you explained it in your presentation. And it made me wonder, and let me see if my understanding of mirroring is correct, that basically not only are you are having the same sensations as they are, or the same emotions as the individual that is expressing their emotions, but you're actually building a connection to them, almost like a network toward that individual. Is that a correct understanding of what you were saying with the mirroring?
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's, we create kind of this this virtual Wi-Fi network with other individuals that is transferred between our brains, because it is like Wi-Fi. What they're feeling, what they're seeing and imagining in the story is being programmed into our brains in the same way. And we receive that same information and we begin thinking and syncing up through that Wi-Fi network of hope.
Okay, without getting too deep,
We
this
could
is
go deep, yes.
well, no, we can go deep, which is when you think of it from an evolutionary perspective, where people were around the same individuals, and therefore, when you had this mirror network build a connection to the people around you, you had a really tight woven network. I've heard it called interactive memory, for example, where you have this tight woven network with this community. And in a transactional world where most of the interactions that we have in our daily life is with strangers or people that we have very shallow relationships, do we lose the benefit of having that type of system in general? Obviously, there's a mild benefit, but do we lose the full impact as opposed to a community of deep-rooted connections where you're with the same people all the time, constantly deepening that shared neural network?
Yeah, absolutely. We were designed to be in close connection, right? And we see that, as we begin to unpack this research from the microbiome out to belief system support, encouragement, all these things point back to the fact that close communities are the healthiest way for us to live. Now, unfortunately, we live in disconnected state. Like you said, we encounter strangers, we have semi-communities at work, but we're not in these like close communities where we're telling stories, we're assisting each other, we're sharing resources. We become, almost like one organism working together for the benefit of the group. And we see that today with all of the studies that show people feel more and more disconnected from each other. And they show that social disconnection, isolation, and hopelessness have an even greater effect on our health than diet, exercise, or sleep. And they equate it to, being socially disconnected is the equivalent of about 6 alcoholic beverages or 12 cigarettes a day of kind of stress load on the body.
Okay, so how detrimental to hope then is the way, and forget the diet, forget the lack of exercise, the fact that our lives are so transactional, we don't have this robust community. How challenging is it to our hope system? And what are the best ways to prepare our body to even be able to be hopeful, excuse me?
Yeah, it's the best ways to prepare our body to be hopeful. So much of this goes back to the power of a story. Stories give us a different view of a possible future. Without a story, sometimes it's very hard for us to imagine that there can be a different future than the one that I'm currently experiencing. The other challenge in our culture, Michael, is that, the stories that we see around us because of the healthcare system and the culture that's been created only reinforce the negative possible future. 40% of people get a diagnosis of cancer, 66% of people are on medications, 30 to 40, even higher percent of people are going to have dementia, half the population, all these things just simply reinforce a negative future. And so actively working to seek out stories that infuse hope of a realistic possible future are essential for us in building hope inside of ourselves. And then re-engaging with those stories, with inspiring pieces of music, with inspiring movies, engaging actively on a regular basis with community is essential. And one of the things I love to recommend is a potluck. I started a potluck years ago here in the Nashville area. It's one of the greatest things I've ever done. And that little community of people that meets once a month to share plant-based meals has really inspired me of the power of community. We share all kinds of resources. Somebody needs a nurse practitioner, they find one. It's really remarkable. And so if you don't have a community, a simple way to do it is start a potluck. In the Plant Nutrition Project, we created a potluck guide. You can download it on plantnutritionproject.org, and it walks you through the basic steps of how to start a potluck in your area.
Great. Awesome. And, just along the same lines, I think it'd be great to have like a list of hope inspiring movies and, or TV shows and music, so that people can kind of treat it as a library when they need hope. They can, they can just tap
I
into
love that idea.
into the movies. So what along that lines, what are experiences that inspire hope? So for example, you can go to I've gone to inspirational speakers, and you get in there and perhaps it's false hope, and I'll tell you why I say that, but you get in there and you're so like ready to go, and you're so motivated during this inspirational speaker to get you all, jazzed up and ready to go out and take out in the world. And then you leave and you're like, I don't know what I was doing with that energy. Right. But what are experiences like that have a more, durable hope that you would recommend people try to, as kind of build up our hope system, if you will, that we can go to and participate in?
Yeah, I think that's a thoughtful question. Again, I'm going to go back to potlucks. It's a regular monthly meeting. And, for example, I'll just share a quick story. We have this monthly potluck, and we just had, a couple that came in, and she had really been struggling with health issues. And it was a natural evolution of the conversation that two other people shared a similar struggle, the things they did to overcome that, and resources that they could contribute in a meaningful way to her life. And she left and said that she had so much hope that things would change. And she came back the next month and, shared all the things that had changed in her life, the part of her environment that changed, and she received more hope the next month. And so that again goes back to the idea of community that we're talking about. It's great to, going to a conference is a wonderful opportunity, because sometimes we need that infusion of new ideas, but we can't go back home and not be connected or have an anchor for what was planted. And going back into a potluck community, or a lunch community, a lunch and learn community at work, or things that you do with your neighbors on a regular basis that are kind of like-minded, that's where hope, I think, is cultivated. Just like when we plant a seed in a garden, we don't just plant it and water it once. That would be going to the conference. We plant it and we water it regularly, and we pull the weeds and we take care of that little seed. And the same thing with hope. If it's planted, we have to cultivate it.
So in your experience, to people who are hopeful, is hope somewhat accidental, or do they have to cultivate it like consciously, or do people fall into a group and it happens to, accidentally give them hope? Or do you find that people are out there consciously seeking hope and building a hope system?
I think sometimes we can accidentally fall into hope. People talk about, finding a book, stumbling across a story, and it happens to resonate with them in the moment, and they have hope. It can be accidental. I think that, as a movement in this kind of lifestyle plant-based nutrition, I think we need to do a better job of creating opportunities for people to tie into hopeful messaging and meaningful communities that will assist them. Because it's the world is difficult. It's not cultivating connection and hope. And I think that's something that we can do better. I just point to Forks Over Knives. I think they do a great job of this, telling stories, connecting to resources, moving people forward. And so, but I think both. But I think it's incumbent on us as leaders in this area to start doing a better job of creating like a sticky web where people can get caught into the hopeful message and the resources and the people and support that are necessary to help them.
All right, great. Well, I really am inspired by this conversation, literally, and this conversation itself has given me hope. As we go through the conversation, I'm getting more and more questions to ask you, but I understand that you have to run to do your day job. So I want to thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us today. It really did inspire hope within me, and I'm sure in many of our participants. So if we could unmute the audience, please.
Thank you, Dr. Stoll.
Thank you, Dr. Stoll. Thank you, Stoll. Thank you, Dr. Stoll.
We need hope in.
This is